Welcome to Too Fond of Books. My name is Janelle, and this is my wrap-up video for the first week of Jane Austen July. I love Jane Austen July. It is such a great event here on BookTube, and I will link to an announcement video down below in the description box if you have not yet heard of Jane Austen July. So I want to tell you about what I've been reading this week during the first week of Jane Austen July, and I've gotten off to a strong start. I'm really happy with what I've read. So I read a few books, little books that I got from the library. This is Tea with Jane Austen by Vogler, recipes inspired by her novels and letters. This is just a tiny little book, and it was really fun to flip through. She had an introduction, and then for each recipe she has she'll have a quote or a bit from one of Jane Austen's letters, something like that, and then she gives the recipe and then a nice photograph of it. And then the other thing that I like is that she also includes what the recipe would have been in Jane Austen's time, which was really fun. So this was really fun to flip through. And in the end, there were two recipes that I decided that I would consider attempting to make myself. Now, let's see if I can find them. I should have, of course, marked the page. That would have been, of course, a better use of all of our time. This is gooseberry tart. We have a gooseberry bush in the backyard with a lot of gooseberries on it, so I thought that would be a fun one to try. And the quote was from a little bit about Mansfield Park, which was apropos because that's the Jane Austen novel that I read this week. Poor 10-year-old Fanny Price, arriving at Mansfield Park for the first time, is so exhausted and homesick that, quote, vain was even the sight of a gooseberry tart toward giving her comfort. That's good. And then the other one that I thought that I would give a try to was, okay, this is not one that I was going to make, but I just wanted to show you this. Hedgehog is adorable. Also, hilariously, my husband thought that all of these little spines were cloves of garlic. So that would have been quite the hedgehog. They're actually marzipan. Okay, and then this was the other recipe that I thought would be fun to try. This is toasted cheese. And yeah, I was, just really interested in that recipe. So we'll see how that goes. It's been super hot here, so I'm not going to be doing any baking or toasting of cheese in the next little while. The other book that I read was this, Cover to Cover, Jane Austen Cover to Cover, 200 Years of Classic Covers by Margaret Sullivan. This was really interesting to read through, and it was actually far funnier than I was expecting. So she starts with the very first editions of Jane Austen's works, and she gives a lot of really interesting detail about the publishing world and how books were made and how covers were chosen. It was really, really, really interesting. And as you can see, I've tabbed up a few things. There was a few gems in here that I wanted to share with you. So the first one was this, the Peacock edition. Isn't that gorgeous? So that is from 1894. George Allen produced one of the first truly iconic editions of Austen's work. It is fantastic. I love it a lot. Okay, and then here is a quote. So back to when we were talking about when I was talking about how it talked about the publishing world and books being put together, they mentioning early on, like this is still really early on, Austen still had fans both ordinary and famous and on both sides of the Atlantic. One admirer was Sir Walter Scott, who in 1826 confessed to his diary, read again for the third time at least Miss Austen's finely written novel of Pride and Prejudice. That young lady had a talent for describing the involvements and feelings and characters of ordinary life, which is to me the most wonderful I ever met with. What a pity such a gifted creature died so early. I thought that was pretty fantastic. The other interesting covers, early covers that I thought were these ones, Chapman and Hall Select Library of Fiction. And so these were when the bookseller, W.H. Smith, began placing book stalls in railway stations. And so these were the editions of Jane Austen's work that were published for that purpose. And I find it so interesting considering that previously the covers were this, like no picture, just, you know, leather or whatever that was. And so to get covers like this all of a sudden that early, I thought that was really interesting. Okay, and then now we get into some of the hilarious covers. This is a cover of Emma from 1950. Okay. So there's a lot to dive into here. And so I want to read from the description that they have here. This is an Abbey Classics edition. I'll let you get one more look and then I will read what it says. Mr. Elton's tipsy Christmas Eve marriage proposal to Emma Woodhouse is perhaps an unusual choice for a cover illustration. One would suppose a hero might make an appearance in such a prominent image, but it does give the artist of this circa 1950 edition the scope to put the couple in a romantic clinch that brings out all the stylistic cliches of mid-century romances. Abbey Classics line is far from appropriate for the period. Despite a few neck ruffles and a nod to the past, Emma's neat coif, broad-shouldered blouse, and waspish waist, sorry, I couldn't say that, have more in common with a plucky Girl Friday than a heroine of Austen's time. The village of Highbury, too, appears to have been relocated to the Swiss Alps, judging by the peak of snowy trees and rooftop chalets seen through the carriage window. So can you see that here through the window? Oh, so good. So good. I also noted here the very first Penguin Illustrated classic of Pride and Prejudice from 1938. Very interesting. Okay, and then we got to the section of editions from the 50s and 60s, or the 60s and the 70s, and wow, was there some crazy stuff. None more so than this one of Mansfield Park. Okay, so it says, a frolicking comedy of manners as fresh today as when it first poked fun at the society of early 19th century England. Okay, so first of all, does anybody think that Mansfield Park is a comedy of social manners? I don't know. And then to make it even worse, the back, and I'm going to have to put spoilers across the screen because the back of this edition completely spoils the story. A gem of social satire, it represents a milestone in the history of English letters. Its theme, the comedy of manners, has become one of the most fertile subjects of the modern novel. The author, Jane Austen, acclaimed as the greatest woman novelist, deftly exposes to ridicule the hypocrisies of society around us. Here come the spoilers. Fanny Price, a poor, neglected relation of Sir and Lady Bertram, has been educated at their expense. However, the self-centered, superficial society of the Bertram household begins to fall apart when Sir Bertram's daughter commits adultery and his frivolous, pleasure-loving son lies ill at death's door. Only then do the chagrined Bertrams realize the true worth of shy little Fanny. Right? Okay, like that is 100% spoiling the story because those two events don't happen until there's like 40 pages left of the book. So, that's crazy. Okay, Then there's these editions, these pan classics of the late 60s and early 70s. So get a load of this. What do you think? Novels of the late 60s and early 70s that were aimed at teenage girls typically featured a stylized portrait of the heroine on the cover, and these pan classics from Pan Books are no exception. On the Northanger Abbey version of 1968, Catherine Morland becomes a plucky girl hero in her own right, complete with cascading 60s tresses, a dress that looks more like gun sacks than British Regency, and a suspiciously sleepy-eyed expression. Alright, so there you go, Northanger Abbey. Likewise, for 1971's Sense and Sensibility, it seems that Marianne Dashwood had stumbled onto a stash of magic mushrooms in her woodland wanderings, and here Eleanor thought her sister's passion was for dead leaves. Sense and Sensibility. Persuasion's Captain Wentworth appears to be alarmed by Anne Elliot's décolletage, or perhaps that she seems to have forgotten to wear her stays. Or it could be that this is a fever dream of the post-accident Louisa Musgrove, her brain still a little scrambled, in which she wanders around Bath without her undergarments and with a tree sprouting from her bonnet. There you go. Oh my goodness. Yeah, this is very entertaining. All right, and then these Magnum Easy Eye editions from 1968 are very gothic-y. I kind of like that. And then, oh, here is definitely a gothic one. Paperback Library of Northanger Abbey. It says on the cover, "The terror of Northanger Abbey had no name, no shape, yet it menaced Catherine Morland in the dead of night." Oh, so good. All right, what else did I note here? Oh yes, these Tor mass market editions from the 90s. Take a look at that. So, Pride and Prejudice from 1994 features a swooping Rococo title and a frizzy wreath of rose bushes beneath which Mr. Darcy kisses Elizabeth's hand and then probably serenades her with a crooned rendition of Purple Rain. And then there's these Wordsworth classics, and I have this one of Persuasion. I don't have these other two, but I do really like these editions, and I love that the cover goes, from the front to the back, that it's all one cover. Then there's this very interesting edition of Sense and Sensibility. This is Broadview Press. This is a Canadian publishing house. Look at that. Doesn't that look more like a Bronte than an Austen? Yeah, definitely. All right, one more and then I will move on, I promise. This is Transatlantic Press from 2012 of Emma. Sorry. There you go. Can you see that brilliance? Okay, now listen to this description. The cover of this 2012 book uses a wildly inappropriate photograph of a woman in a black hoop-skirted gown, her hair loosely tied up. She looks more like a girl going to a goth prom than a character in a Jane Austen novel. Frankly, it would work better as an action flick. To wit, movie voiceover guy. In a world where a woman has no power, Emma Woodhouse holds an entire neighborhood in thrall. If you get engaged to someone of whom she does not approve, she breaks it up. If you fall in love, she will interfere. If you dare to propose to her, prepare to have your heart broken. Brackets. A woman dressed in black picks up her skirt and runs through a garden as her hair tumbles from its confines. A whole new look at Jane Austen's most unexpected tale. This summer, don't get on the bad side of Emma. So yes, Jane Austen cover to cover was very, very entertaining. Likewise was Where's Jane? So this is like Where's Waldo, but using characters from Jane Austen. So here you go. Here's like a synopsis bit of Pride and Prejudice. And then these little characters across the top here are what you are supposed to look for in the picture on the next page. So can you see that? This was really super cute and fun. I did all the puzzles and it was great. Okay, I also read Mansfield Park. I read it in like a week. I thought that I was gonna, read just 2 chapters a day and then finish it towards the end of the month. But I was really enjoying it so much that I ended up just reading it in 1 week, and I loved it. It was so good. I've tabbed it up, and there's a lot that I want to say about Mansfield Park, so I'm gonna do a separate video review of Mansfield Park. So watch for that coming up. I also read A Dance with Jane Austen, How a Novelist and Her Characters Went to the Ball by Susannah Fullerton. Now this one was really interesting. There was really great information about how people prepared for a ball, what they dressed at, like how they dressed, how they arrived at a ball, the ball itself, how that worked, so specifically the dances and supper time, all of that. It was really, really interesting. Sometimes though, like the writing was a little bit strange, because sometimes, she was like, I think she was really interested and really invested, and other times maybe not as much. Also, sometimes she skipped around between her tenses, which was just kind of annoying to me. But there was some really interesting analysis of some of the novels, especially the Watsons and Northanger Abbey. So there's a couple things that I tabbed in here that I wanted to share with you. One, it certainly has really, really beautiful illustrations. Yeah, look at that. Here's another example. All right, and then, so she's talking about assembly balls. She goes into all of like what's a private ball, what's an assembly ball, all of that. And when she's talking specifically here about the assembly ball in the Watsons, which is a fragment that's maybe 50 pages, and it's really unfortunate that Jane Austen never finished it, because I think I would have really loved that book. Jane Austen, however, has plans to introduce her heroine to her hero during this ball, and has to somehow bring together a man belonging to the aristocratic Osborne party and the daughter of an impoverished clergyman. The ingenious device she employs is a child, young Charles Blake. By rescuing from his disappointment and embarrassment at being stood up by Miss Osborne, Emma attracts the notice of Charles's family and friends, his mother, uncle, Tom Musgrave, Lady Osborne, and Lord Osborne. Oh, quote, "Oh, uncle, do look at my partner. She is so pretty," young Charles announces loudly. What heroine could ask for a better recommendation to the hero? Mr. Howard and Charles's mother, Mrs. Blake, ask to be introduced to her, and Mr. Howard invites Emma to dance, but they are then immediately impelled in opposite directions, that was a quote, by the pressure of the crowd in the room. Movement is used here to foreshadow the future progress of this romance. Emma's father will soon die, and this will result in Emma's removal to Croydon. Mr. Howard does manage to return to claim her hand in time for the dance, as he will finally get to Emma's side to propose marriage. Or at least that was Jane Austen's plan for this unfinished novel. The enjoyment with which they dance together also indicates the promise of compatibility in their eventual marriage. Isn't that interesting? I found that analysis really interesting. And then in the assembly balls in Northanger Abbey, Catherine Morland goes to a ball and does not dance a single dance. The event is presented by Jane Austen with light irony as a form of imprisonment and near torture. Just as Gothic heroines in the fiction Catherine loves to read are locked away and ill-treated in dungeons, so Catherine is trapped and pressed by this assembly ball crowd. Right? Very interesting. All right. And then in the chapter on private balls, this is talking about the private ball in Pride and Prejudice, and the scene where Elizabeth it's the second time that Jane Austen has brought Darcy and Elizabeth together. The first time they met, Darcy was rude and Elizabeth could only suffer his insult in silence. So Darcy emerged from their encounter triumphant. The second time they meet is very different. Here, Sir William encourages him to ask her to dance, and then she says no. This scene is a brilliant foreshadowing of Darcy's first proposal to Elizabeth halfway through the novel. Sir William's words, "You must allow me," will be echoed when Darcy asks for her hand in marriage. "You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you." Darcy, with grave propriety, requested to be allowed the honor of her hand, that was a quote, in the dance. Quote, "But in vain, Elizabeth was determined," end quote. And even though she snubs him, quote, "her resistance had not inured her with this gentleman," end quote. She refuses his offer to dance, just as she will refuse his proposal later on. Elizabeth may have come off second best in her first encounter with Darcy, but she walks off the victor in this, their second. I thought that was interesting. I never picked up on that connection with the proposals. And then in Mansfield Park, which I've just read, the dance in their house where it's just an impromptu dance. While Fanny is sitting, she is watching the dancers, noticing Maria's sparkling animation when Henry Crawford is near her, Julia's pleasure in dancing with Henry, Mrs. Grant's willingness to abandon her husband to cards and dance with Mr. Yates, though in doing so she deprives an unmarried girl, Fanny, of a partner. The ball is an illustration of selfishness. Tom's selfishness in not thinking of Fanny's pleasure, Maria's in wanting the attention of her sister's dance partner, and Mrs. Grant's thoughtlessness in depriving Fanny of a partner. The scene closes with Tom railing against the selfishness of his Aunt Norris, totally unaware that he is describing himself as well as her as he rants. And to ask me in such a way too, without ceremony, before them all, so as to leave me no possibility of refusing. If I had not luckily thought of standing up with you, I could not have got out of it. It is a great deal too bad. End quote. In contrast to all this egoism is Fanny's youthful, happy enjoyment of her first little ball. Then there was a chapter on the etiquette of the ballroom, which was really interesting, and she actually just laid out the rules to be observed at Bath from 1706. One should never attend a private ball without an invitation. A gentleman could not ask a lady to dance unless they had been formally introduced. A lady must accept an invitation to dance or spend the rest of the evening sitting out all the dances unless she was seriously tired. A couple could dance a maximum of 2 sets, that is 2 pairs of dances, with each other. After that, they were expected to do their social duty and find other partners. A gentleman, single or married, was expected to invite ladies who were available to dance. Everybody must submit to the decrees of the master of ceremonies. At the end of the dance, the man was expected to usher his partner back to her chaperone or escort her to the supper room. There they would sit with her family or friends and not with his. A gentleman was expected to be prompt when coming to claim his partner for a dance for which he had previously engaged her. One must dance neatly, do not caper, kick out, bump into others, or draw attention to one's dancing in an obvious way. Couples had to join long ways country dance sets from the bottom and not race up to the top or push in between other couples. It was bad form to save too many dances in advance and leave no room on one's dance program for requests on the night. Paying compliments on one's partner's appearance was not done. It was assumed that everybody would be appropriately dressed and that a dressmaker or tailor did not need to be praised for doing their job properly. Gloves must be worn by both sexes at all times except at supper. Gentlemen, officers on duty excepted, will not be given entry if wearing boots, and respect other people at all times. I thought that was interesting. All right, and then one more. I thought this was interesting. She was in the chapter about dancing and music. With no microphone on hand to announce in a very noisy room which dance had been selected by the leading couple, it was important to watch carefully. The first lady would announce to those nearest her in line what the patterns of the dance were to be and what tune would be played. This meant that further along the line, couples had to observe the sequence and work out which steps to perform when it came to their turn. So yeah, this was a really entertaining read. Okay. And then the last book that I finished was this, Suspense and Sensibility by Carrie Bebris. This is the second in her Mr. and Mrs. Darcy mystery series. I really love this. These are just really fun, lighthearted historical mysteries where Mr. and Mrs. Darcy are the main character. This book opens 3 months after their wedding, and they are asked to give Kitty a season in London. So they head to London with Kitty and Georgiana, and they meet Harry Dashwood. First of all, they meet Sir John Middleton, and through him they meet Harry Dashwood. So you get all the characters from Sense and Sensibility. You get Eleanor and Edward, who have been married for a while. You get Marianne and Colonel Brandon. You get Mrs. Dashwood, Fanny Dashwood. It was just so much fun. This series has a light amount of, it's got some paranormal aspects or supernatural aspects to it. They're connected to artifacts though, so I find that really interesting. It also adds a really interesting conflict in the stories because Darcy is a man of reason. He believes in what he can see, and he has a really hard time believing any of this stuff, whereas Elizabeth is maybe a little more perceptive and open to that kind of thing. So it adds some really interesting conflict in their relationship. Not a huge amount of conflict, just a bit. I made a note here to read this one bit. Elizabeth is saying to Darcy, "Besides," she added, dipping her pen, "if all 5 of us sisters married within a 12-month of each other, my mother's joy would be too great for anyone to bear." Carrie Bebris has an obvious love for Jane Austen. I really like that. And then there was this hilarious little drawback to the events of Sense and Sensibility. Fanny is asking Edward for some help here. Because her son Harry is interested in Kitty. "If you would only speak to him, please, Edward. You're my brother, and his father is no longer here to guide him." Fanny, "I simply cannot comprehend your objection. She comes from a respectable family, and her elder sister's marriages offer good connections. With Harry's income, he doesn't need a bride with a large dowry." "You would think that a man of Mr. Darcy's fortune would settle something on his wife's sisters to improve their marriageability." "As you and John took care of his sisters?" Silence. I thought that was good. That was very good. Okay, and then I also just wanted to let you know I have started The Mysteries of Udolpho by Anne Radcliffe. However, I'm only 73 pages in, and it's a good size book, so I'll keep plugging along, and if I don't finish it this month, then I'll just keep going and finish it when I finish it. It's very different. It's obviously a much earlier book, so very different style of writing. I definitely have to read it a lot slower than I read other books, but I am enjoying it. And then last but not least, I wanted to show you where I am on my bingo card at the end of week 1 of Jane Austen July. As you can see, I only need 2 more squares to get a blackout. So there you go. That was my first week of Jane Austen July. Have you read any of these books that I talked about? Do any of them sound interesting to you? I would love to chat with you in the comment section down below, and I will see you for another video soon. Bye.